Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's tips and tricks video. This week, we're going to be covering the importance of exaggeration in animation when it comes to both the poses you use and the performance your character gives. Now, in animation, exaggeration can be utilized on kind of a few different levels. In general, the exaggeration is or should be used to accent some sort of action, emotion, or the idea that is taking place on screen. Now, this can come in the form of pushing and exaggerating a pose or poses during an animation to better communicate what is going on, or altering your timing in some way to place emphasis on a certain area of the animation you want to have the viewer see, or maybe just to exaggerate other principles such as, let's say, squash and stretch or follow through to push the idea you're communicating in the shot or the scene. Now, what's kind of important about this principle is that it's only used as it's needed, that it's not overdone, and that it's kind of only applied in a way that will accentuate the action that is taking place, because that kind of helps to add a bit of a contrast between some of the other motions that may be taking place as well during that shot or that action. So for starters, let's go ahead and look at some posing examples here and talk a bit about what I mean. So what you can see here is we've got our character posed, and from the base of it, we can tell that he may be looking like he's getting ready to, let's say, punch someone. And for the sake of this example, that's exactly what he would be doing. Now, this pose, if you look at it how it reads, it reads fairly well. I mean, you can see the clenched fist, you can see he's got a stare which may be staring at a target that's, I'm assuming, would be close to him within punching range. But the pose, it can definitely be pushed and exaggerated to read just a bit better than this. So if we go ahead and scroll up to the next frame here, what we can see is we've got a much better pose, a much better line of action on this character where there's much more wind up here and a much more obvious sense that he is about to kind of swing at whatever may be in front of him. Now, one good way to kind of test your poses inside Maya here is if you hit the 7 key, what this is going to do is this is going to basically change it up so it's in lighting mode only, so you're basically going to be able to see the silhouette here of your character. So if we kind of scrub back and forth, we'll see that the character's line of action is fairly boring here in the first pose, but if I scrub to the second, it's quite apparent that it's much more interesting and exaggerated in this second pose here. So just kind of keep this in mind as you begin to kind of block out your animation. Okay, so next, let's go ahead and look at an example of exaggeration in an actual performance. Okay, so if we go ahead and we play this animation, what we're going to see is we've got this character who's kind of reacting to something that maybe shows up off screen right here. So I'm going to just go ahead and hit play. Let's play through once or twice. And he looks maybe somewhat startled, but the performance itself and the action that he's doing is pretty dull, and it's not very exaggerated here. He's reacting to it, but there's not really anything particularly interesting or exaggerated about the motion. It's just kind of fairly plain. So if we go ahead and open this other example, what we'll see is we're going to have a performance that is much more exaggerated and a much more exaggerated response than what we saw in the first animated example. So as you can see, the action itself is, like I said, much more exaggerated, and it's much more interesting than the basic kind of step back, what's going on here. It's much more interesting to look at than what we previously saw here. Okay, so when piecing together an animation, just kind of keep this principle in mind when kind of piecing together your poses and both the performance that you're creating with those poses. Kind of a clever use or a good use of exaggeration can really bring much more appeal and attention to the animation you're actually creating. Okay, well, that concludes this week's tips and tricks. Thanks again for watching 3dmotive.com.